introduce it as, we're talking maybe about some resets and things like that. And that was the last big reset.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're talking about the reset of 1850.
Well, we can do that, but
is that the Tartari?
You're not a Tartarian. I can feel this from you, Steve.
We can't figure it out. It drives us crazy. But
you're right. The buildings are beautiful, though.
So, hey, we're live. Guess what? You caught us live. We've been kind of riffing here before I hit record, which is kind of an interesting thing to kind of catch us in mid-conversation. But we're live here with the Crimis. And we got Fifth Wall Radio and Isla, who's in the house. And we'll just wait for some people to jump in and populate the chat room. So
and maybe a quick shout out to Jerry from who he said was not well. Just wish him well.
Yeah, I was gonna save that to the end. We can talk about it now and bring it up again. There's no reason why we can't mention him twice. Yeah. So what Steve is referring to is Jerry Ablan, who is a very prolific YouTube podcaster and streamer and connected in with a lot of people. He has been really known for his work with Nish and the Nox Mente and Post Horus shows that they've been doing for quite a while now on YouTube. That's how I got to know Jerry, and I did an episode with them. And Steve, you did an episode with us.
And that may have been the best time I ever had doing an interview. I got to just talk about things I never get to talk about, really deep, weird things.
3 hours.
And then afterwards, we talked for 3 hours with them just on a post show that,
I don't think ever got put up. No.
So they're Jerry. Tireless in his work on the podcast side of things, and the Nox Mente stuff is really, really good and very unusual in that he and Nish create this very nocturnal vibe that allows people to associate in their dreams and kind of go back to those states in a lot of ways. And that's not the only thing that Jerry's been doing. He's been working with a lot of other groups, Discord servers. Most recently, he was working with Jay Widener and Yvonne Palermo for Reality Check, and was starting a new show with Nish. He'd actually asked me to be part of his new show, which is going to be a full moon show that they were going to have a guest on every full moon and kind of tap into that. And I was supposed to be on that show when I was, or he had invited me to be on that show as I was going to be in Nashville about a month ago almost. And I couldn't make it because there was like timing and getting off the plane and all that stuff. And it was a really weird thing because he said to me, well, you could just be on another show in the future. And I had this strange feeling that wasn't maybe going to take place. It was a very odd feeling, like, well, maybe we'll see. That's how I felt. Not maybe we'll see, like, oh, you're burning me, I'm not going to be on your show. But it was like a lot of things could happen. That was going on in my head. Mm-hmm. A lot of things could happen. You get really busy, you get really big, but there was this weird kind of thing, like, I don't think that's a given. So the reason I'm sharing this is I found out yesterday with Emily that Jerry had suffered a massive cardiac arrest and has been put into a medically induced coma. And I was on one level, I was really stunned when I heard that. And on another level, it didn't stun me. That's different discussion. But when I found out, I was really blown away. And now I've heard I've heard two different things, and I'm not sure which one is true, because Suzanne Potter Thomas, who a lot of you people know, and has been involved in a number of these kinds of streams that Jerry has done in the past with other people. So she's connected to Jerry, not just from a chat perspective, but participating in things. she shared last night that he'd come out of this coma and was responsive, and they were tapering off some of the meds. That's what I had heard. But then I was talking with Emily, who's very close to Nish last night, and that's not what Nish said. So I'm not sure what's going on with Jerry right now, but we do know that he is in a very compromised position physically, and I just really hope he pulls through and can get come back from the other side of this.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I
he's
just
not- Yeah, he's not far from here. I think he's in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken.
he's in a place called Gratton, Georgia, Graton.
Yeah.
And at the end of the show, I just want to have kind of a moment or two for him. So we can just send whatever we need, a prayer or good thoughts, or whatever our group can transmit to this man who has worked ceaselessly and in many ways without any desire or need for any. I mean, maybe some people were paying him, I don't know, but I never got the sense that, like, hey, sign up for this and sign up for this and sign up for this. I never got that from Jerry. It was just what he was doing. And I'm not sure he needed the money per se. I don't know that to be true, but that might have factored into it. This was just a labor of love that he was doing.
Well, it's interesting that what Jerry and Nish talk about, the field that they play in is the twilight field. And it's very interesting that he's right now in a twilight phase. And he's
That's
being
true.
held there medically. And so when he comes out of this, he may have some interesting developments come from that experience, because he's really in the underworld.
Might have something to bring back.
The other world. So maybe we could look at it that way, that he's doing work of some kind.
Well, I think it's a really good analogy. Like, he's in this liminal space, right? In the in-between. So maybe he is doing some really interesting work. Let's hope he can report back to us. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And I think it also touches this piece of how in a lot of ways how vulnerable we are. I mean, there's no guarantees with any of us. So that death as teacher always comes up, and it's so mundane, but always very profound.
Right. So certainly one of my favorite aspects of the Castaneda books is death and as an advisor on your left shoulder all the time. And I think both of us have kind of felt that.
And it's also the time of year. We're in that time. That's why this time is so sacred, because this is when everything closes down. The earth is breathing in. And so all the extraneous outward movement has been called back for reevaluation and regeneration.
In this part of the hemisphere, right, above the line, above the equator, which is, I mean, there are people that do watch this, but they have their own version of it, right? It's just upside down. But you're totally right, and there's no mistake that when we get into the winter solstice, we're in the season of Capricorn, which tends to be austere and kind of dry, and this idea that we're going to go the distance, and there's endurance involved, and all the things that go along with it. And we're moving into a very intense and heightened Capricorn season coming up. A Capricorn season, the likes of which we haven't seen. So these ideas around the going within, the deep seed time, sort of the death of growth in the northern hemisphere is really going to be accentuated with this coming season of Capricorn.
I had an interesting insight one day back when we were up on the farm that death is alive. Death itself is not dead.
It's interesting.
Death is alive. Death is.
When I think of that, what I think of? I think of prions. And Prions are these really weird things that they discovered when they got into Mad Cow, and they started to look at the brain waste, and it's these prions that wind up consuming the matter, the vegetal matter of the brain. And these prions are like, they're dead, but they're alive.
Like a black hole.
They're weird. Prions are really weird.
I've heard the word. Yeah.
So death as being alive. Well, this is a really wonderful, lighthearted way to start our show.
I like it. I like it. I think it's
so we could have started with me and Steve disagreeing on Tartaria.
Right. That's where I was going to say we should share with people. It's not an inside secret.
The thing is, I don't understand it well enough to critique it, and that may be for another show.
We keep trying to find a video or something that, like, okay, all right. But of course the buildings are gorgeous. Yes, they're beautiful. Yeah, well, all right. So some of the windows appear to be like they were underground, but.
Well, I think that, so for me,
nothing compelling,
Well, so I grew up around those buildings in California, like the Palace of Fine Arts, and I used to spend a lot of time at the Palace of Fine Arts, and that's kind of a centerpiece on a number of John Levy's videos.
That's a triangular building?
No, the Palace of Fine Arts looks like something right out of Maxfield Parrish. And it's really a stunning piece of architecture, which is really out of place in a lot of ways. And so also growing up there, talking to my father, and he went to a World's Fair in San Francisco in the late 1930s, early 1940s. But there were those other World's Fairs that were there. And so those pictures of the World's Fair, the Treasure Island World's Fair, and the World's Fair that took place down by now what we call the Presidio, which the Army took over. I used to look at those buildings. I used to see those postcards and those pictures, and I was like, what happened here? Where did these buildings go? Why did they tear them down? Because they were spectacular and looked like they had kind of, this idea of eternity built into them. Yeah. And so for me, as a young person growing up in the Bay Area, I was kind of stunned by the then and now. Mm-hmm. And did you see the thing that I talked about with the water temple in San Mateo County? Did you catch that at all?
Yeah, that's at the Soda Springs. Right?
Oh, Soda Springs. Yeah. Alan Chadwick wanted to buy Soda Springs and just was trying to raise the money and never happened, but he had great vision for that place.
I don't think this is Soda Springs.
Really?
No, this is in San Mateo County in California.
Okay.
And this is in the Crystal Springs Reservoir. So there's a spring involved, but it's not Soda Springs.
Okay.
And so when I was a kid, like you could actually drive to this water temple and kind of hang out there. And it was like so out of place. I felt like, what is this doing here? And it just reeked of antiquity. And it doesn't even really perform a function, by the way. It doesn't have anything to do with the reservoir. And now it's off limits. You can't really go there. But I also remember like my grandfather sort of tagging along with us one day, and he was blown away by this thing. And he was not anybody really sophisticated. He was a bus driver in New Jersey. But there was something about this water temple that made him like want to like have a pilgrimage to this thing. Like we were living in San Bruno, and this was not a man that was in very good shape, and he wanted to go walk there. It was like, moth meet flame. And so when I started to watch the Levy videos, it started to spark things with me. And then he asked some really pertinent questions around how does San Francisco go from this boom town, 1848, 1849, and almost overnight has all these amazing structures and this grid layout. Like, how does that happen? And when you do the math on it with the numbers and the time frame, it's almost virtually impossible in some ways to work some of that out. Like, there's no population there. And if there is a population there and they're there for the gold rush, wouldn't it look more like Deadwood than San Francisco?
Well, I'll say on the other hand, right? Well, two things. One, I was doing the research for Fitzhugh Ludlow's book, and he went out there in 1861, took a covered wagon ride out there with the painter Albert Bierstadt. And so he talks about, I have a lot of his writings about San Francisco, at least in 1860. Okay. And, it was at that point anyway, it was a really sophisticated city. So I have his.
But how does it get so sophisticated in roughly 10 years?
All right. So I'm begging the question. So I'm just saying in 1860, this is what was going on there. And, he meets Mark Twain, who had been there for, 10 years or something like that. I don't know, but but right now it takes me a lot to sell, for example, the Empire State Building in, 1920 was built, 2021. Mm-hmm. It took 11 months from the spade breaking the ground to the first tenants going in. It took 11 months to build the Empire State Building.
Was still hot when they were.
That's a completely different century though, and by the 20s, smelting I think, if you want to buy into this idea of a reset, we're well into the reset at that point.
Right. Well, all right. So then the whole point then, my being logically, if that's so, then everything so all of a sudden everything just was formed, or we all just popped in. I mean, what's the rationale? What's the mechanism of this actually happening? That's what I don't get. So show up in these cities that were formed already, and with the brainwashing that we've always been here. And
so the idea around Tartaria, and again, you have to kind of suspend some belief on some level to begin to bring this in. And it's clearly not for everybody. And at the same time, when you begin to look at some of the pieces that are in place, you kind of go, wow, like the orphan train stuff is kind of mind blowing. And the amount of people, these kids, they talk about a rough number, maybe 200,000 kids. There are reports that it's closer to 500,000 of these kids on these orphan trains that get basically shuttled out west. And John Levy, this has worked out really very interesting for me on a person, with the research stuff, right? I've been talking about this Pied Piper Hamlin thing.
Yeah.
You know this. I've been talking about this for the past year, looking at the astrological stuff around it, and how it applies to Greta to some extent, but this is a thing, right? So when I started to think about these orphans, immediately I clicked into the Pied Piper of Hamelin. This has been going on for a very long time, and that the idea of that is that he goes in and he takes these kids and he takes them into the side of this mountain, and it's does that make any sense? Do kids just disappear into a side of it? Well, if there's a cave system, they do. And so John Levy, Jay and I talked about this. We talked about the Pied Piper Hamlin. And then about 5 days later, John Levy comes up with a video on the orphans and the orphan train. And he talks about Operation Pied Piper, which takes place during World War II.
Oh, really?
And these kids are literally just taken away from their families during World War II because of this threat of the war. And they're taken to these centers. And they're these massive facilities for these foster kids.
Where? So is this
in Europe? In Europe. And then they get moved out into places like Canada and Australia. And so they're already involved in this kind of relocation of children.
And this is before the war? This is preemptive?
This is during World War II. This is just before, during Operation Pied Piper. He talks about this, and he talks about the Pied Piper frickin' Hamlin. So here I am looking at this Pied Piper thing as being more than just kind of this allegorical tale of, paying the rat catcher, that there's actually something going on here. I'm looking at the orphan trains, I'm making these connections, and boom, John Levy does a video on this stuff. Just days later, I'm like, wow, this is really interesting on a synchronistic level. And then as I started, and the orphan stuff really resonates for people, right? There's something about this idea of our stolen past and our roots that people really are connecting with in a very deep way. And I looked at my own past, and I looked at my father's father, and his father. It's kind of sketchy. Like, my great-grandfather was kind of an itinerant, vagrant wanderer who was raised by an adopted family. And you start to talk to people, and all of a sudden they said, yeah, my grandmother used to talk about how, she was raised, she was adopted. And all of a sudden these stories are becoming kind of more commonplace.
Yeah.
So to me, this is, Steve, you asked the question, like, how does this all happen? And it's about kind of introducing a population. And that's part of this idea around this whole Tartaria piece.
To what end? So what would be the impetus?
Well,
Why?
let's say, for instance, you were black nobility, one of the Venetian families, royalty, and you had your boots on the ground, people like Sir Francis Drake or some of the early world explorers, and they came back to you and said, you won't believe what we found, right? Mm-hmm. And they're sitting around going, holy shit, maybe we should really explore this and not just see what's there, but maybe there's an opportunity for us to create an entirely new history. And if you're a king or queen or noble, or you're, say, the House of Rothschild, who's funding wars and discoveries and some of these journeys, and wouldn't you want to be a part of this? Like, would you want to be the architects of a completely new history?
Sure.
And that way you could just kind of roll it out and then control people in a way that they're not even being aware of, right? So I think to that end, I think that's where this discussion comes into play. And I haven't really gotten into this, but there's this guy by the name of Fomenko. Do you know who he is, Steve? So there's this guy named Fomenko who has this idea that the Middle Ages and that the whole Dark Ages period is kind of a complete lie. And that there was a whole kind of conscripting of these church scholars.
Yeah, I know the theory, yeah.
To create this history that doesn't exist.
Right.
So I haven't gone into that yet. I haven't completely dove headfirst into that. But it's kind of, in some ways, the left hand of the right hand Tartarian piece.
Right. I've heard that, and that, and sometimes they go as far as to say, there was no Rome or what have you. But also the so-called Dark Ages were only dark in Europe.
Right.
It was the height of culture, with Rumi and Ibn Arabi and throughout the Islamic world. That was their height of culture. During that same.
So what was going on with the Byzantine Empire during the Dark Ages? Had that been extinguished?
Empire started falling apart about that time, but it was still held up throughout the 700s, 900s up to around 1100, and then it started, and there was a battle called the Battle of Manzikert out in eastern Turkey, where they actually won the battle but lost the war. They were fighting the encroaching Turkish tribes and the Mongols, and they won the battle, but it so weakened them that they were just a slow dissipation after that in Byzantium.
Well, they did with some rat plagues too, in a big way in the Byzantine Empire.
And some people say that was I've heard that's also a part of, because remember, one of the Crusades, they couldn't get to rape and pillage in the Holy Land. So they were stuck in Constantinople. So they said, well, while we're here, let's rape and pillage Constantinople. And they and this was I forget which crusade it was. But
I think it was, wasn't it Richard the Lionhearted? I think that was his crusade.
I don't know if he meant, I don't know. I'm not a real good scholar on that, so I don't remember if that was him or not.
Because that's what they did. When they pulled into town, they were not the best guests, apparently.
No, so they did a number of on Constantinople, long before the Ottomans got there in 1453 to take it down.
So anyway, I mean, the Tartarian thing, you've got to, I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours watching Levy's stuff and a bunch of other videos. I've been on some, like, once I get into something, I become
I
obsessed.
find it very compelling myself because of the beauty. And I have this heartache about beauty. And I was just looking at, iPot. You ever watch him, In Pursuit of Truth?
Yes.
Okay, so he had a clip this morning from what was going on in England, when there were, all these guys are up on the stage, right?
The NATO summit.
Okay, the NATO summit. So I'm looking at the background and I'm saying, where are they? What is that room? It looks like they're in a freaking garage. Now, these are the leaders of the world, right? What are they doing in this room that looks like brick or concrete blocks?
Right.
And then they pan around and they look at the stage. I'm saying, that is like the shittiest stage I have ever seen.
Right. If this is the height of culture and this is what you're dishing out.
Are you serious? With all the gazillions of dollars these people have, and this is what they want to be seen in, So it's like I can't help it. When I see something like that, I just go like the blood drains out of my body. I'm like, please, the beauty feeds us.
Well, so I don't know if you caught when I first did the astrology, the reset, I talked about you.
I just caught that. Yeah. We did somehow.
We turned it on just as you mentioned her name, I think, anyway.
Because when I saw Tartaria in these buildings, the first thing I thought of was you.
Why can't we live like this? What are we doing? It's like everywhere I go, there's like 20 new hotels in Asheville, right? They all look like Soviet block buildings.
They're supposed to.
Why?
They're supposed to.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the new reset. That's the new reset.
Exactly.
You've got more money than God, and this is what you do with it?
Right. So, form follows function, theoretically. Walter Gropius, and the form now is this kind of recasting of these extremely depressing Soviet structures.
Yeah.
And I also look at buildings like, well, when you look at architecture and its purpose and its function, when you look at some place like Chartres Cathedral, that architecture uplifts the human spirit.
That's its function.
When you look at a building like Walmart, what is its function? Is to extract everything from you, your energy and your money. So it's like, I look at that and that's literally what I see. Mm-hmm. I feel like the life force is being sucked right out of me. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's my rant.
So if that's true, right, then where's that life force going?
It's feeding something.
It is feeding something, right?
It's eating something. It's food.
So maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, kind of a wild idea, but maybe that life force is being fed into an alternate reality or a different dimension where it is like fucking amazing, right? And they're creating this alternative dimension that they ultimately will occupy. This is not for them, right? And this is like, kind of where we're going to be.
I was thinking more like these crappy buildings are feeding the negative.
Yeah, but obviously there's some other, if it's true, like if somebody's losing money somewhere, somebody's making money somewhere.
Right.
So if our reality is becoming uglier and more kind of utilitarian, then there's another reality that is completely opposite, that is based on these ideas of beauty and elegance and novelty. And maybe that's not for us. Maybe that's being created for somebody else. It's an idea.
Perhaps I would like to think somebody's enjoying beauty.
Sort of the sort of a beauty ergamore or something like that.
Well,
yeah,
I do
like that. Yeah.
There's a book that I just want to throw out there for people if you're interested in this topic, and this is what really catapulted me in my awareness. It's called Islamic Art and Spirituality by Sayed Hossein Nasr, Nasr. And that book is the one that really turned on an internal switch for me for realizing that we're being fed ugliness and beauty is really food for us. So if you're interested in the topic, you may find his work very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when I saw these Tartarian buildings, I just immediately thought of your thoughts on beauty. And then it just made total sense to me. Like, okay, I get what Krys is really talking about.
I know, and that Chicago World's Fair, that, what do they call it? Something like the White City or something like that?
White City. It's stunning.
Oh
Right.
my
Stunning.
God.
Now I can remember the New York World's Fair of 64, 65.
Part of the narrative for a reset, right, Steve? I was there too.
I grew up in Queens, so I was in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And my father at the time, he eventually had made a fair amount of money doing truck repair at his gas station in Brooklyn while they still had industry in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, he was a truck driver for the Long Island Railroad, I think. And so actually, we built a house in the Catskills on all the leftovers from the World's Fair when they took it down.
Yeah.
So we had all those, crappy plastic futuristic chairs and things like that. But, I vividly remember because it was so exciting, even though I went twice, once in 64 and once in 65 or 65, 6, I can't remember. So I would have been 7, 8. But it was so exciting, even though in retrospect, the buildings were generally pretty ugly. But the thing I remember more than anything was the Pieta of Michelangelo that they brought in. And because the way they set up the entrance is sort of like a moving sidewalk because they didn't want you to
Yeah.
And this sort of like red, my memory anyway, is of these red velour curtains in this long tunnel of darkness. And then it opens up and there it is,
I remember that.
Glorious white marble lit up.
Yeah.
Just blew my little aesthetic socks off, for a 7-year-old. It was the most incredible thing.
Right. Yeah. Do you remember the Lincoln automaton doing the Gettysburg Address?
Johnson Wax Pavilion.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember that.
And that's way ahead of its. Think about it.
Well, they were scripting out. This is where things are going.
Yeah. There was the Ford City of the Future. I remember, all of it. All they left up. Was the Unisphere,
right?
And the they turned one thing into like the skating center. We used to go ice skating there.
The Unisphere at least had something.
Okay, so there are two questions. One, did you have a Swedish pancake?
I think I must have.
I don't recall.
Because the Swedish pavilion was serving Swedish pancakes or Swedish waffles. It was a Swedish waffle. And man, I saw one of those and I nearly beat up my parents for one. I didn't get one though. So
I dip in the hot oil and it looks like a snowflake. It's like they take like a mold.
Well, there's the powdered sugar and then there's the whipped cream and all that stuff on it, right?
Something else. Okay.
Yeah, and it was like, wow, I really want one of those.
No, I went nuts at the Sinclair Pavilion.
That was number 2.
I got a Brontosaurus.
That's the second question. Did you get the Brontosaurus?
I got a Brontosaurus.
I got a Brontosaurus too.
I was big into two things. I had a library card at 3 years old in New York City. At the time, they told me I was the youngest person in their system.
That doesn't surprise me.
And two things I got books on astrology, astronomy, and on dinosaurs. So I was like the space and the distant past.
The space and dinosaur thing was my thing too, right? It was like total,
it's a guy thing.
In the past or out there, that was like grabbed my attention. Yeah. So I got the Sinclair dinosaur, and now the way this thing was set up, it was all transparent, and I think it was like $1.75 or something like that. And you put the money in,
Right.
and there you could see this green wax getting heated up,
Oh,
and it got shot through this whole process, and it filled up the brontosaurus mold and the machine. You got to watch all that,
Yeah.
and then it had to cool off, and then it went through and cut off all the kind of excess plastic, and then it dropped it down like a sandwich from a vending machine, right?
Oh, God.
Yeah. Oh, it was
Oh,
like
I could just see little
the
boys
coolest
just
thing.
losing
Oh
their
yeah.
marbles
I mean,
over that.
that was like way beyond. I mean, when we used to go to Manhattan and hit the Horn and Hardart thing where you got a sandwich for
Right.
for a quarter. So what were you? So your parents took you all the way out there just to the World's Fair from
So
California?
no, we lived in New Jersey.
Oh, you lived in
Oh, you
Jersey then?
lived in
Okay.
Jersey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that brontosaurus, man, that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
It's like you got to see it get made, and then you got it, and it was like a solid, hard plastic dinosaur. Yeah, we lived in New Jersey until I was about 5, and then we moved to California. I do think we went to the World's Fair twice. Now that I remember it, but
So
very vivid memories. I mean, so we both had the Sinclair.
Oh yeah.
Experience.
So
Doesn't surprise me.
when it was taken down, my father would just bring the wood home in a trailer. We'd drive up to the Catskills, and my parents, I was just starting. I wasn't helping for a while, but they built a little house in the country with all the wood from the World's Fair.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What happened to that house?
I don't know, it might still be there. It's on a little lake up near Liberty, New York.
Mm-hmm. The guy whose idea was for the World's Fair, very controversial. Like the city didn't want the World's Fair. Apparently, they didn't want it, and he pushed it. He pushed hard for this thing to happen. I think he was also he was a major architect in New York, and eventually he wound up like being busted on like charges of corruption and stuff. And
you don't remember
the way that he handled the World's Fair was almost entirely autocratic. So that's a whole other side to that.
It almost sounds like Robert Moses.
Yeah. Well, Flushing Meadow Park was that was as far out of Manhattan as you could get, pretty much. The only thing they had there was the U.S. Tennis Center and the Singer Bowl, which is now a huge complex now, with the Arthur Ashe Stadium and the rest of that. But the Singer Bowl was the place. So
it is Robert Moses, by the way. That's who we're talking about.
Moses.
You're talking about Robert.
Okay, was Moses.
I figured it could be anybody else.
That was the description.
Yeah. Oh, he's so interesting because he's just a complete devotee of the automobile and building highways to cut up neighborhoods, and yet he never drove.
He never owned a car.
He never owned a car, never had a license, but he's the one. Part of what he did was great. The highways going out to Long Island, going out to Jones Beach, they're like parks.
Parkways, they were beautiful.
Beautiful stone bridges. Part of his legacy is wonderful.
Fruit, flowering trees.
But he crossed the line when he was going to do a highway across Lower Manhattan, and he was going to bust that up. And they went after him, and they finally won.
Right.
And he was trying to do it because he and LaGuardia were like the check and balances. Fiorello LaGuardia, mayor of New York, were kind of like he's the only person who could check Robert Moses because he was the most powerful person. He was head of the transit authority, had all their funds
accountable to no one. He had all that money to just play with.
So so the thing that was controversial about that World's Fair was that there had already been a World's Fair in North America, United States, Seattle in 1960. And there's like a time span where you can't have another World's Fair, during a certain period of time. And so what Moses did is he broke with the BIE, the International Exposition or whatever. Mm-hmm. So this entity that creates these World's Fairs, he broke with them and basically said, screw you, we're going to have our own World's Fair. And that's where it all, and I wasn't aware of this, but I was just looking at it, but apparently he was also involved in the World's Fair in 1939, 1940.
He must have been much younger then.
which apparently lost a bunch of money. It was kind of a failure. So he saw the 1964 World's Fair as his ability to kind of make that other World's Fair good, right? But so he wound up like going to jail or something, didn't he?
I don't recall that. You know,
I don't remember him
but I
going to
think
jail.
he did end up kind of in at least in disgrace.
He was very powerful. I know, like nobody could touch him. One of the Burns brothers did a special on New York, and he featured prominently in it. They told his story.
Yeah, the lesser Burns.
Wasn't, I don't know.
I forget who's the big one. There's Rick Burns, right?
Rick Burns and
like the other Burns did a 10-part History of New York series, which is really well worth it. It was really fantastic.
You mean, speaking of the Tartarian building,
Ken Burns. You're talking about Ken Burns.
Ken Burns, right?
That's it.
Rick Burns is his younger brother who did this one on New York.
But that's where I learned that they took Penn Station, which looked like a Greek temple, and it was only 50 years old, and they just bulldozed it and put up the piece of crap that's there today. And there were angels on the pediment, and they took those angels and they dumped them in a swamp in New Jersey. Now, why would you do that? That made my head explode.
Yeah, there was the quote I always remember from Vince Scully talking about, the Dodgers or whatever coming into town to play baseball, coming into Manhattan. And, you'd come into Penn Station. He says, we used to come in like gods. Now we come in like rats.
Wow.
That's the feeling you get,
And maybe that's the point.
because that's what I grew up coming into this hideous Penn Station that you just couldn't
awful.
wait to get the hell out of there, I mean, at least Grand Central is still there.
Right.
And that's still beautiful. Train stations, that's another thing. Train stations are, go through Europe. They're the most magnificent buildings.
The train station in Paris is beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, and the Orient Express train station in Istanbul is gorgeous. At least the outside. We never saw the inside of it, but the facade is really beautiful. Like pink granite or something.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Domed roof.
So reading about Robert Moses, and he did not go to jail, but his power diminished considerably.
Somehow they undercut him.
Yeah, and he wound up being almost disgraced by the end of his life. There was a book called The Power Broker, and it was a Pulitzer Prize winning biography by somebody named Robert A. Caro. 1,200 pages. Edited down from 3,000 pages, showed Moses generally in a negative light. Essayist Philip Lopat writes that Moses' satanic reputation with the public can be traced to Caro's magnificent biography. For example, Caro describes Moses' lack of sensitivity in the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway.
Yeah, I was about to say the Cross Bronx, that was his undoing. It destroyed the Bronx in horrible ways,
Broke up neighborhoods.
And how he disfavored public transit. Much of Moses' reputation, which gets back to your car thing, for a guy that never drives a car, much of Moses' reputation is attributable to Caro, whose book won the Pulitzer Prize in biography in 1975, and the Francis Parkman Prize, which is awarded by the Society of American Historians.
Right.
And was named one of the 100 greatest nonfiction books of the 20th century.
Yeah, she was really big in the preservation movement in the buildings in Manhattan. So the destruction of Penn Station was the clarion call for that to happen.
So Moses denounced his biography in a 23-page statement. Wow.
Oh, I'm sure he was fit to be tied.
To which Caro replied to defend his work's integrity. Very interesting.
Yeah, Caro's he features prominently in that documentary by Rick Burns on New York City.
So this guy Moses was a Sagittarius. Born December 18th.
Wow.
Isn't that Pearl Harbor Day?
No, 7th.
I get the 7th. I get it mixed up with the 8th, which is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, the 7th.
The 7th, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. That's the famous FDR speech taking us to war.
Okay. So interesting, the idea of this Sagittarian expansiveness, with his work and the city. Interesting stuff.
And his arrow over the road.
Yeah, that's true.
Did he have an arrow over the road too?
No,
No,
I'm
no,
saying
no.
but the road is an arrow. It's
Right.
a direction of arrow.
Yeah, so in Feng Shui, that would be seen as a poison arrow, right?
Yeah.
Breaking up neighborhoods.
Interesting. Same day as Brad Pitt. It's Brad Pitt's birthday. The 18th of December.
Yeah. But the whole beach on Long Island, Long Beach.
Robert Moses.
Jones Beach.
Jones Beach was all done by him. So.
And there was a beach named after him, wasn't there? Moses.
Well, there's Robert Moses Park,
yeah.
right? So there is
the beaches
something
on Long Island are wonderful,
and they're all preserved. So I can't say everything bad about him, but definitely he was very very Caro-centric, and that was really the worst thing.
He had a little
about
too much power.
He's born the same day as Stalin.
The same actual day?
No, different year. Stalin was born on in 1878, and Moses was born 10 years later, 1888.
Well,
Wow.
couple of good autocrats.
1800s.
And sandwiched between them is Ty Cobb.
Ty Cobb.
Born 1886, 1 year before Robert Moses.
The Georgia Peach.
He was a piece of work, wasn't he?
Apparently, he supposedly sharpened his spikes to slide into people, and and just talk about and talk about difference between then and now. What is he? It's like at the end of his career, he basically had a liquor store, just so that he could be drunk all day.
He was very wealthy, though. He was not hurting for money. Ty Cobb had amassed a significant amount of money. Okay. He was also a high-ranking Mason.
I'm talking baseball. I'll be back.
And one more little Ty Cobbism. Apparently, he picked up this one guy who was a hitchhiker, and he was drunk. And Cobb related the story where he murdered somebody, right? So he's also probably a murderer too.
And I wouldn't put it past him. But and then I guess you've been kind of keeping up. There's a couple of weird fights in sport. There's really a lot of serious violence going on. There was a big fight after the Chicago Bears Dallas Cowboys football game outside of the stadium between, I don't know, it looked like they beat the crap out of some Cowboy fans.
Oh, really? Was that happening? Were they actual fans?
After the game last night, and I mean, I looked at the video, and I almost have to laugh because I don't know, maybe millennials fought different than you and I did when we were kids, but it's like, if you look at the Antifa people, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. No, they're just they're like flailing, and I don't know, it's like a techno dance / jujitsu, kind of, but and they don't hit anybody. They just they fall all over the place. I don't know,
So there's actual footage of this?
Yeah, I just saw it this morning. Yeah, so there's a fight after the game, and apparently, the story being, oh, well, the Bears kicked their ass in the field, and they kicked, the fans kicked the Cowboys. But, and then there was something in LA, or was it or with the Lakers in Denver game, right? Somebody got whacked in the stands who was, I don't, it's just like another sign of the friggin' micro divides that they keep.
We're falling apart at the seams.
It's like you can't even watch. I mean, look, Yankees and the Red Sox have the most heated rivalry in all of sports, and the fans sit next to you, and they don't beat the crap out of each other in the stands. They goof on each other, but it's not. This is like really, really friggin' serious. I mean, is it because they have nothing else? I mean, I don't know. But anyway, you watch these people fight. It's ridiculous.
I actually found the video. You want to play it?
Okay. Go ahead. Throw it out.
Okay, so these are the bad brawls. Krys is bored out of her mind.
Right,
hold on. I had to find this. to see what you're talking about. Okay, so here we go. This is it's not great, but here's the big fight, the big rumble after last night's game. Should we break this down a little bit? This guy does not know what the hell he's doing.
Right, I could do better.
Right, and watch number 52. He does this like kind of weird little dancey thing. 52.
Why is this even a thing? I mean, this is just a bunch of kids. This is not a thing.
Look, 21. What is he? He's like doing like the Chinese acrobats or something, you know. And this is a big.
Well, why is this even in the news?
You know,
Who cares?
and I was comparing this to, you know, I think you talked about it, the London subway guys who try to stop the subway in London, and they're all standing on top of the subway, and you know, and these are all, you know, London,
Miners.
you know, working class people, you know, going to work, you know, yeah, and they didn't fool around.
No, they didn't. And the whole idea of that subway protest is just so utterly ridiculous because those are the Extinction Rebellion people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, these people are using public transit to get to work.
Right.
You know, why are you making such? If you really want to make a big deal of it, go out onto, you know, the M1 or M5 or whatever they call their freeways and go stand in the middle of that thing.
Yeah. Or no one's sitting on the, you know, no one's protesting the yacht that Greta is being driven around around the world. You know.
Did you see what happened? There was a pretty well-known YouTube channel that was set up by these people who basically sail around the world and had a pretty good following. And they volunteered to help Greta. And the response was so vitriolic to their channel that they had to shut their channel down.
Really?
Yes.
For helping her.
Against Greta.
Against Greta.
So people are wise to the whole manipulation.
They're wise to the whole thing. I mean, that's the one thing that never really gets communicated at a mass level. All we get is their Twitterverse depiction of reality.
I mean, you want to talk child abuse. That child is filled with rage. Why?
Yeah. You know.
Well, you saw Michael Jones's breakdown. Did you see his breakdown?
Yeah, we saw about half of it. Watched like the first half. Yeah, that's right. I'll remember for you.
Well, he says that Greta's mother was too busy being a big opera star.
Mm-hmm.
And so
she got really pissed off at her because she wasn't home.
Yeah.
And
so
she went on a hunger strike because she wanted her mom home to make her 5 gnocchi. Because that's really all she eats is like 5 gnocchi.
5 gnocchi.
Maybe it's like 7 or 8. So she went on this hunger strike, and her mother had to put her very important opera career on hold. But by the way, Greta has a younger sister who is a musical performer and flies all over Europe to do these gigs. You never hear about her younger sister.
Well, you know, and I think I emailed you. There was someone who we really don't know called and left a message and asking us to participate in this fast. But it was made to sound like, you know, well, we're fasting for, for spiritual upliftment or something like that. And the Native American is sort of like this vague reference to the Native American community or something like that. And then, I declined, I just left another message saying thank you, but that's, not what we do. But then I was driving, and then there's sort of this focal point downtown, which is called the Vance Monument, which is this obelisk. And that's where actually Krys used to stand there with the women in black every Friday for a long time.
2 years.
And which is really a dignified, silent protest of violence in the world, in the war. And so, but then there they are, honk your horn, we're fasting for climate change. And so one, it's sad. Two, it's useless. And 3, why are you following, this poor 14-year-old and 15, however old she is, girl, why are you taking advice? Why, the children shall lead us. What kind of crap is that? What the fuck we lived this long if we didn't learn a thing or two? So.
Well, like for the past, so I'm 70. So let's say for the past 50 years, I've been working toward cleaning up the planet and doing my part that I can. And then this child is going to come and say, how dare you? And
It's insulting.
what?
It's totally insulting. And for people like yourself.
This is not okay.
Yeah, no, it's completely insulting.
You know, when you've worked 50 years to, uplift the planet, then maybe you can have something to say with respect to other people.
Yeah.
But she's been programmed to talk that way.
But she's also a Capricorn, and I think she has her moon in Capricorn as well. And they have a very different way, even if she is supposedly dealing with Asperger's. Their style of communicating, especially when they're young, can be very off-putting.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I mean, because Capricorn likes to assume that they're the authority, right? I mean, that's the whole idea behind Capricorn. And you have this young Capricornian teenager who basically called her mother off of a world tour, got her mother to start to feed her, and now she's being given, crowned this kind of, beatitude of the environment, the saint. She's going to just take that thing even further. She's going to be a Capricorn about the whole thing.
Maybe
and that's not bad per se, but it's arrogant.
Maybe there was a programmable gnocchi.
Wouldn't surprise me. Programmable gnocchi.
I used to make gnocchi with my grandmother when I was a little kid, before I was going to school.
So how are your gnocchi skills these days?
It's been a long time.
He hasn't made a gnocchi
It's been
for
a
me
long time.
ever, so I don't know.
Sounds like a bit of an opening there, Steve.
I
It could
think
be.
maybe it's time.
It's time. The shepherd's pie with the mashed
Oh, that
potato
was
left
good.
over from Thanksgiving
That was
wasn't good.
That
Okay.
was good.
Anyway,
So you guys
Okay.
told me about your paleo pizza, which I have not done.
Oh, it's so
But
good.
maybe you want to share your paleo pizza recipe with everybody.
okay. Well, it's you take mostly. I usually use half to about 3/4 pound of chopped lamb, ground lamb, and then you could use other things, but I think the lamb works the best.
Yep.
And then I run some, since I like it, garlic in the food processor, at least a head.
And some diced onion.
I don't use diced onion.
Well, I do. I like it.
I know, but have you ever made it? Have you ever made it?
I made it first. I told you about it.
So anyway, when I make it, I don't use the onion. I just use chopped garlic. I use onion and meatballs though.
I like.
And then you take it, get some parchment paper on a cookie sheet, and you pound it out really flat. You can throw salt and pepper in that. Pound it out really flat, till you have like a pizza thickness, and then bake it for, I don't know, usually takes about 12 minutes or so, something like that. Usually about 450-ish.
15.
And it'll turn brown.
Yeah.
Then you pull it out, and then you use that as a crust, and you just throw on whatever you're using, whether tomato sauce, mozzarella, vegetables. Pepperoni be kind of superfluous at that point, but I usually like to saute to really brown, like peppers and onions, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just throw it on the top, throw the cheese sauce, and then bake it until the cheese melts, and that's it. And just cut up and serve it like a pizza.
And it holds together like a slice.
Oh,
Yeah,
amazing.
it'll hold together.
Amazing,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you kind of.
It's kind of greasy, so you don't want to hold it like.
Yeah,
slice,
you
but-
kind of have to do the nasty of a knife and fork probably.
Uh-huh.
But
It sounds good. So when you pull it out, you have to let it cool for a bit, or
not much.
Not really.
Not
uh-huh.
much.
By the time you cut it and get it to the plate, it's fine.
All right. So there you go, the Crimis paleo pizza.
That's really good.
Yeah, we got it out of I guess a
Yeah,
paleo
one
book.
of the paleo books, I think Paleo Kitchen or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's delicious.
Yeah,
Gotta try it.
And it's
Gotta
meat.
try it. So you guys sent me a bunch of images
Yeah.
and
So,
some information about Turkey. You want to get into that a little bit?
well, yeah, I guess. Well, we were kind of thinking about resets, and in general, and seems to be in the air in a lot of levels. And you've been talking about Tartari as a reset, and people have been talking really about. I mean, there's huge political reset going on. There's a monetary reset. Well, part of what we thought we might talk about, and we can see if we get there, is like the original reset, which was the flood. And the flood took place, 10,800 BC or so. I can get into that. But here, if you just want to pull up pictures, we can talk about. So this is, this is from our first date in Turkey in 1985.
Right.
And I had been there 2 years before, and I had met this shop owner. Is this in Karaman?
That's what I was thinking. I think this is Karaman.
So this is just a little vegetable stand.
I think it is.
And I had met this guy 2 years before, and he remembered us coming through. And, again, this is a time where not a lot of, being an American in Turkey was really a great thing.
Oh, Karaman or Bursa? It's not Bursa.
I don't think so. I think it's Karaman.
That's a serious mustache, man. Look at that.
Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, the Turks have Turks are great mustaches. And well, that was, so you can see some of the peppers and greens, and those are lemons on the lemons, right. Oranges. Mm-hmm. So, and that's pretty early in the year. We would
look how adorable Krys looks. Look at her.
How what I look?
Well, adorable.
Oh, adorable.
Yeah, she's got.
I thought you said normal.
She's got her. She's got her.
You look pretty normal.
Pre-Seattle grunge flannel on.
Right.
Yeah.
Always ahead of the time. So
this is really, when you say your first date, this is really your first date.
We did.
Literally.
Well, it wasn't even really a date.
It was a trip together, but date works.
We actually came home and went to a movie once. That was like a date. But yeah, we backpacked for a month in Turkey, and it was my first time out of the country. Mm-hmm. I was 35. The tail end of a bad marriage, and I was like Alice in Wonderland, fell through the rabbit hole, and I like, wow, these are my people. I just loved it.
So whose idea was it to go to Turkey? I mean, obviously Steve had been there, so Steve, did you bring that to the table?
Yeah.
Well, there is a backstory.
Yeah, the backstory was that there was a conference that Krys had gotten a flyer for, and I love that shot.
Yeah, I got this. All right. So I got this flyer, this notice in the mail from the Institute of Noetic Sciences that there was going to be a peace conference in Malta. And the people who were slated to be there was the Dalai Lama, Jehan Sadat, Desmond Tutu, Marilyn Ferguson. I was like, wow, what would it be like to be in the same room with all those people? And so at the time, I was still married, and I said to my husband, wow, look at this. Isn't this amazing? Maybe we should go to this. But he was absolutely never interested in traveling. So I brought it into work, and thinking, I worked in the hospital. I thought there's a lot of professionals who I work with, and they could afford to go. So maybe even if I can't go, someone else would benefit from this. So I passed it around the coffee room, and nobody was interested. And then it was before I worked at the greenhouse. I was still inpatient, and we were in an admissions unit. And so I was in charge of the recreation room and activities. So I went down to the rec room, and I opened up the rec room, and the patients came in, and Steve brought the patients in. He worked on the ward. So I had the folder on my desk, the flyer, and I said, look at this. Isn't this amazing? So the first words out of his mouth were, do you want to go? So I was like, yeah, I do.
Wow. And you're married at this time, right?
I was on the tail end of a very, very troubled marriage. And so it had been on the rocks for a good 7 years. So that was not even an issue, like whether I could go or not. Yeah, I could go. So, but it was too expensive. When we looked into it, it was way too expensive. I think it was for 5 days, and it was like, what?
$4,000,
$5,000. I don't know what it was. So Steve spoke to his friend Peter, who he did a lot of traveling with, and he had been to Turkey with Peter, and like 3 months in Turkey and 3 months in Europe, they backpacked together. So Peter suggested, after we ran through other options, Peter said, well, why don't you take her to Turkey? So he came into work that day, and he said, oh, Peter thought maybe we should go to Turkey. I was like, Turkey? Why would anybody want to go to Turkey? Because my only reference in 1985 to Turkey was that movie Midnight Express. Remember
Oh
that?
yeah, right. Yeah, with Brad
That
Davis.
was all I knew about Turkey. Okay, so this drug dealer from Long Island ended up in a Turkish prison, and they tortured him. And oh my God, what a horrible story! And
Oliver Stone wrote the script of that.
did he?
Did he?
Yeah.
Billy, I forget his name.
Yeah. So it's like, no, I
Yeah.
don't want to go to Turkey. So Steve said, okay, tell you what, I'm going to bring in my travel journals, and I'll let you read my journals. Well, I was pretty much smitten when I read his journals. And then he said, I have a suggestion. I could bring in my slides and we could do a slideshow on the ward for the patients. And you could get to see the visuals that go along with the travel journal. And that clinched it. So at that point, then we said, okay, all right, this is different from what I imagined it would be. And by then I was thinking, well, this guy's pretty cool. Maybe I would like to go to Turkey with him. So that's what happened. And then we ended up going, that was like in the fall of 84. And then in May of 85, we went from.
Yeah. So that last picture, the Galata Bridge is this wonderful float. It's a floating bridge. It burned a few years ago, but it had all underneath the roadway. It had restaurants.
Yeah. Oh, it was wonderful.
And we had a lobster.
We had a lobster dinner there. Yeah. It was $20 for the two dinners.
It was like by far the most expensive dinner we had in Turkey, and it was $20. I mean, it was like, soup to nuts to everything. It was the most astounding
But that trip
dinner.
changed my life. Absolutely, absolutely changed my life. It was like Alice in Wonderland fell through the rabbit hole.
And here's Steve as the young adventurer.
There he is.
So yeah,
love that photo. It's a great photo.
I love
Isn't
that photo.
that
I want that.
wonderful?
Yeah, if they need to put one on my tombstone, I think it'll be that one. That's the far southeastern corner of Turkey, right next to Iran, and it's at the time actually there were refugees from the Ayatollah there, and it was like the remotest place. At the time you could only get to it by road, maybe 8 months out of the year. They was snowed over. But yeah, it was just an incredibly wild place. There were, Kurdish nomad tents everywhere. Anyway, so we did a little climbing. Yeah, I love that shot. You can see the little square. That's my Turkish to English dictionary in my pocket.
Oh, look at that. And this is the trip that he took before he met me.
Yeah, so it was 2 years before. Yeah, and I was at that point.
So was this part of your slideshow that you?
Yeah.
Showed?
So yeah.
So Chris, you're looking at this going, oh wow, man.
Oh yeah.
Check him out.
Yeah, and I'm really.
That's Lawrence fucking Arabia right there.
Yeah, and I'm really thin because I'm like at the end of 6 months of dysenteries.
Oh, there you go. You're in shape.
Yeah.
Which is like that's your badge of honor if you're a traveler. You have to have it for some point in time.
Yeah, the bummer about this thing is this graffiti down here in the left-hand corner.
We use that
for
somebody else was doing it on something, so those are the pictures I had easy access to, and that
they had to just like spray paint in the Harkari Turkey 1983.
Right?
What's up with them?
Harkari.
Great picture.
Oh, what a wonderful country.
Great picture. So same with our little theme here. There's this other picture with the two of you together that is really, well, we'll talk about these guys later. Just like, let's do this. Let's see, what is this? Okay, there's that. And I think this is it.
We're not boring the crap out of everybody.
I think this is interesting.
Oh, everybody loves a love story.
Sure, why not? Okay, so this is the two of you together here in this photo.
It's my all-time favorite picture.
And we see, look at the two of them. Aren't they cute together? Look at that.
Yeah, he's not in the picture, but we kind of hooked up with this guy near Cappadocia, which is the place with all these incredible soft sculpted places and troglodyte dwellings because it's all really soft sandstone, and it has they've uncovered like 7, maybe more by now, underground cities that interconnect with each other. The one that we visited supposedly would hold 100,000 people up to a year. So that, whatever armies were coming across the Anatolian plains, whether it's Alexander or the Persians, and they would just duck underground and wait it out. And there would just be like one passage going in, and they could roll a wheel in front of it, and or you can just pick off the people one by one if they try to attack. So so we met this guy there, and he was a really nice tour guide.
We had taken the overnight bus into Cappadocia, and we met Haki on the bus.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
You broke in.
I did. I broke right in. Well,
so anyway, we met these guys, and they took care of us. And at one point, we were taking a ride, and he says, "Stop!" And he stopped outside of this farmhouse, and he just says, "All right, I got to go in a second. I'll be right back." And he just says, "Come on in.
We're gonna have lunch here."
We're gonna have lunch, and so we had lunch with his family.
And they were just sitting down to their midday meal, which was like a banquet.
Which is their big meal.
Interesting.
The meal of the day, and we were welcomed in as guests.
So went to this room, which as you can see, there's carpets down on the ground.
Right.
Sat in a circle. There's only the men and Krys.
Yeah, the little girls came in later. This is after we finished eating, but
yeah, and so everyone got like a big cloth they put on the laps in this circle, and they brought out a little stand and this huge metal tray, and then all the food was on the tray, and you would just be eating it. We're taking the bread and dipping in whatever is there, bringing out,
and soup and salad and tomatoes and so forth. And those little children looking in the window at us. It was like the circus had come to town, that we were such a curiosity for them.
Yeah. And so isn't this the little girl that said something about your nails?
Yes, this little girl was sitting next to me. Well, she liked my white socks, and she didn't like my fingernails were too long. She's looking at my fingernails. Maybe for a farming community,
right?
Hard workers don't have long fingernails, But she
Interesting.
was the beauty. Look at her.
Yeah, for sure.
And the women didn't come out of the kitchen. They kind of like peeked through the doorway, as we were leaving. I got to say hello to them, but they didn't come in and join everybody. They stayed in the kitchen. They were kind of shy.
Just the kids and the men, and then the neighborhood kids you can see in the window behind us.
Right.
This is in the Peristrema Valley. Yeah.
So, but the Turks they're just such sweet people.
So hospitable.
They
treated us with such kindness and
but,
generosity.
Yeah, that's such a sweet little shot.
So, kind of a complicated situation in Turkey now. Do you guys have any desire to return or go back? Or
we
were there 3 years ago, in 2015, and then four now. Wow. Yeah. So we did for the 30th anniversary. We went back, and and part of the reason was to go to Göbekli Tepe, which is pretty much the oldest acknowledged archaeological site in the world. It's one of the pillars there. So we went back. Yeah. So yes, things have gotten hotter still, but actually I would at least go back, maybe not out to Eastern Turkey at this point, with all going on in Syria and the armies moving. And I think we got in and out of that area, at a relatively quiet time.
Things were just starting to heat up in 2015, and we did notify the State Department we were going, and we only stayed 2 nights in the town called Şanlıurfa. That's where Göbekli Tepe is, about 20 minutes outside of the town. But we didn't feel comfortable staying there any longer than that.
No, we would have become a thing if we were there any longer. But Şanlıurfa is a beautiful town. I may have sent a picture of the park there, but it's at least one of the birthplaces of Abraham, and so it's a highly pilgrimage place. So Göbekli Tepe, for those who don't know, was built about 12,500 years ago to 12,800 years ago, something like that. And it's a series of structures with these pillars, and they've uncovered right now about 5 of them, and in the hill there's probably 20 of them.
circles,
20 of
20
these,
circles.
20 of
not-
these
yeah.
stone circles. So you can see it's like Stonehenge. This is probably about 10 to 14 feet high.
Mhm.
And they're all carved in, and I never really know what it's called, bas relief,
Bas
or
relief.
basic. So
Yeah,
bas relief,
bas.
they're all carved in bas relief. So they're carved with animals. This one is kind of interesting. No one knows quite what to make this little weaving thing, but the bottom and the top are similar to what are snake heads on other of the pillars. So it may be some kind of interweaving of that. So there's a lot of interesting things about it, but the things that what it did, it turned complete archaeology and anthropology on its head, because these were built before anyone farmed. They're pre-agricultural. So the theory, the ironclad theory was, you learn agriculture. We stay in one place, we build a population, and then we start putting up structures. Well, the fact is that no one lived in this place. There's just a little bit of evidence of animal sacrifice, but these were built by people who weren't permanent residents.
And
Right.
they ritually close them up. So
Right.
these stones that you see piled up, right?
So after 1,000 years, they would, I don't know if all of them were went at once or what, but after about 1,000 years of use, they ritually closed them up, which is why all the carvings are in good shape. And eventually it just became a hill, and they really only noticed because the tops of these pillars are kind of protruding. There are other hills that they found where they see more of these protruding. So the concept of the extent of this site, they could be really amazing.
Kind of reminds me of what they did in Chaco Canyon, where the sites were ritually closed, right?
Right. So
Out
these are
west.
all ritually closed with these stones. And then, so the bottom layers had things that they could carbon date to this particular time. And I also find that the most sophisticated of the circles are the oldest ones. And they, over, a 1,000-year period where they were building them, they were less and less sophisticated. And they find this a lot, like with Egypt, and most cultures just seem to land fully formed, which may, correlate with other theories we were discussing earlier. But so there's so much of interest, and then they seem to be very much astrologically aligned. I don't know if you have the one with the scorpion on it.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's the one that's gathered the most interest, because basically all of these ancient structures have some sort of astrological significance. So so people have been still trying to figure out what the heck this stuff is about. So a lot of the early research pointed to alignments. There were certain of these stones had holes in them, and they could work out alignments to Cygnus. And it seems like Cygnus was very important, and I think the main star in Cygnus, Deneb, may have been the pole star at this time. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have on these pillars is, you can see fingers, these hands. So they're almost like the heads, they're like, they're sort of like a fat T shape, but there's no head on them. But what they have are these hands around the side, and you could see like sort of long stylized arms across the face of the pillar.
Right.
And then what looks like a belt with possibly a fox skin.
Yeah, it looks like a pelt of some sort, right?
Yeah, so a pelt of a fox skin over that. So these are the main pillars are like that. Now a lot of the pillars have animal depictions, and this.
So is this like a loincloth? Is that what this is?
In a way, that's
Kind
what it
of.
looks like.
It kind of looks like if this was like a belt,
right?
Then this would be a loincloth kind of hanging down.
You would imagine.
And what you see a lot of are these H's, right? And you can see them facing, and a couple of them on the other side, and then some of them are facing the other directions.
Right.
So that's a big mystery of what these H's are, and also those pocketbooks that people are always pointing out in Mesopotamian art. You see like a priest or a god and in Egyptian art also, it just looks like a little pocketbook. It's got a handle and a little thing underneath. So
It always reminds me of what the Queen is carrying.
Yeah, like
I
those
think,
little,
well, what is she?
Those little faggy
What
bags
is she up to with that?
that the Queen carries. Yeah, you know.
Maybe the H is like the brand of the department store they got it at.
It could be. It could be. Yes, Steels Are Us. I think it is. Yeah. So
I think
this is cool. So how long did you guys spend hanging around?
So we went there
Göbekli Tepe.
2 days. We were there twice. The energy was really interesting there, but it was like other. You know, there was nothing. You know, it wasn't like going to a Greek temple where I can kind of relate.
Mm-hmm.
There was something very other about the place, besides the fact that it was so ancient. Yeah, here's the one I was talking about.
There you can see the pocketbooks up top.
So I sent you an article, and I haven't really finished reading it, but I kind of skimmed over it. So this is one of the most famous ones because you've got a scorpion there, so everyone thinks, all right, well, let's check it out for astrological significance. And you've got this other sort of vulture or an eagle thing.
Well, that's the Sinclair Brontosaurus, man.
It is, and they may have been around then. Who knows? So so a lot of people are trying to work out what this actually is. So the article I sent you, their summation is that if you take this being Scorpius, and then the other depictions are the nearby constellations. They don't necessarily exactly fit that way. And that this ball is the sun. And then you see all the way on the bottom is this possibly a headless human figure. So because this can be dated, and if you, what do you call it, archaeoastrology, right? If you set the time where all these things would be in this particular configuration, it comes out almost exactly to the time when the supposed comet hit that started the flood. Okay, so the theory being and the evidence being that something hit. So the end of the ice age was starting actually, and then something hit the ice cap, in what is now Western Canada, where the ice was miles thick. So something hitting that, because the evidence is that a massive amount of water, an unbelievable amount of water, is released at once.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that plus the steam plus everything set back the end of the ice age and called what's called the lesser dryas. So that's an age after that.
Mm-hmm.
So one possible answer to what's on this pillar is that this pillar is an actual memorial of that event. And some other people, like Andrew Collins, people who have been writing about Göbekli Tepe, think that Göbekli Tepe was built to propitiate whatever deities brought on that event. And the other thing also is that the timing of this event, and because you can imagine all this water being released, steam, the sky is darkened. So there was also, a great extinction event with animals and flora and fauna, et cetera. So, it's really very, I forgot the main point I was gonna make, but it's Plato, and also when Plato talks about the destruction of Atlantis, the time he gives for it is exactly this time that this happened. When he says it was something like 8,000 years before him or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it all works out that some sort of reset happened at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of think that personally, that's when we had our own reset, when we came back.
Yeah.
That's when we started getting very heavy into more research about what's going on in the world and what are the underlying impulses for what we're seeing today. Mm-hmm. And that all started right after we came home.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What an epic start to an epic relationship and marriage and publishing company. And it all kind of has its roots right in that Turkey trip, huh?
It sure does.
Yeah. In
My
fact,
whole world
yeah.
was turned upside down.
Yeah. That was, yeah. So like I said, we've been talking about a number of resets, but yeah, that was a big one, going to Göbekli. Something shifted, and I can't even begin to describe it because it was so subtle.
Yeah.
You
You would
know,
say, well, nothing really happened.
No.
But an interesting thing, this was on my desk when we started the talk, and I said, I should tell about this.
I sent him the picture of the tree, but I guess he doesn't have it. But on top of the top of the hill has a tree at Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, and you're actually looking out into Syria. So when you're standing with Göbekli to your back and you turn around and you look.
Oh, wow.
There was, and all the mustard was in full bloom. So it was just fields and hills full of yellow blossoms. But that was Syria, looking right into Syria. So there was a tree, they call it Potbelly Hill. That was the local name for it before they uncovered it. And so there's a tree up on top. There's a one lone tree up there. And it's become sort of a place where pilgrims will leave artifacts and offerings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, oh, that's nice. I should leave something here as a thank you. Just thank you. Here we were here and we appreciate. So I had a ring that I had bought when we were in Sydney, and I loved the ring. But I thought, well, that's okay. That's all I have. I'll just, I'll take the ring off and I'll leave it in the crotch of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
I came back the next day and it was gone. And so we stayed the 2 nights, and then we flew back to the West Coast, and on this small inter-country plane, right? And so the woman who was sitting next to me was Turkish, and we got into a conversation, one of those delicious conversations that you have when you don't speak each other's language.
Right.
So you're doing some sort of like hand language, and well, I know a few nouns.
Mm-hmm.
And so she offered me her lunch. She was very friendly and kind. Mm-hmm. And so somehow I was talking to her and saying, well, we just went to Göbekli Tepe. Do you know Göbekli Tepe? And she's like, no. And so I had a book with me. So I opened up the book and I showed her, and she was very interested. And so we had our awkward conversation around it. And then before the flight ended, she turned around and she gave me this ring. And she said, I want you to have this. She took it off her finger and gave me this ring. And so I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? And the flower that's in there, it's a little daisy in the daisy family. It's not a daisy, but it's in resin. Mm-hmm. And when we were in Ephesus, at the healing center in Ephesus, all these flowers were in bloom. And I thought, well, that's a real connection to Ephesus and Göbekli Tepe, and meeting this woman who just replaced the ring that I loved with another ring that has much more meaning for me. And so it's one of those magical things that happen when you travel. Mm-hmm. So that's my little story about that.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So I just got a text from Emily, and it's about Jerry, and apparently Jerry is breathing on his own now.
Oh, that's good.
So that's a really great sign.
Oh, good.
Good to hear.
And so hopefully he'll, come back into full consciousness and get back on his feet, and then kind of hopefully, join the party again. So congratulations, Jerry.
Yes. Well, Steve did light a candle.
Yeah, we have a place where we light candles for people. It's kind of full right now. Actually, we have a bunch of people.
We've had,
a bunch of people. So very good.
So you want to talk about your Indie GoGo? You want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah. I guess. Yeah. So I just want to make an announcement. I think I did send out an announcement, and I sent it to a couple of people from the Texas, but I was kind of shy to send it out to everybody who doesn't, I don't like to burden people with Logosophia missives, but I really only do it like twice a year. Anyway, so we're doing an Indie GoGo campaign. So another reset is trying to take Logosophia up a notch. It's been kind of floundering along, and I've been finding partners. Like, for example, we're looking to partner with this publisher called Autona Media on a book. And but one of the main things that we really need is a new website. I mean, the website is on iWeb, which is an old Mac program, which is no longer supported. And you go to our website, you see a picture of the book, the buy button could be like anywhere, So so we sent, we're looking to have that done. And wow, look at that. Some people comment, that's really nice. So, so we need to do that, and it also will give us some money because, if we were able to, do a little targeted advertising and for the production. So we have a bunch of books that we're looking at to try to do this year, and that are really, really excited about. And I think, I got really burned out doing the Fitzhugh Ludlow complete works, and I was never going to publish again, but, I got over it. So, so that's really the story. So I guess the easy thing to do, or if we don't put up the URL, I can put the URL in the description box or in the comments. If people want to help donate, we have all these lovely little perks, including some one of our books Krys did illuminated letters for, which are just absolutely gorgeous, and we have that as sort of an artwork gift for people who give. They're really spectacular, and so we have, like I said, different levels involved getting books and some other sort of secret chat books and things like that. So it just went online yesterday, and if anybody can pass it around, even if you can't, the lowest, even for was it 25, you can get a paperback. 50, you can have one of the hardcovers, and I don't know what else to say about it, except that that's the video took me about 4 weeks to do. It's just nuts. And it's only supposed, it's like they tell you, it's got to be 3 minutes. And if in 30 seconds, people don't know what you're doing and this, that, and the other thing. And after a while, I just screw it. I'm just going to make the video I want, instead of trying to cater to what they say is going to sell or not sell or whatever. So I just did the best job. I did a lot of quotes. We've had some great, really great writers.
Such good fortune with endorsers, really.
Yeah, Charles Fraser, who won the National Book Award for Cold Mountain, and Alan Kaufman, who's won all sorts of awards.
He's wonderful.
Martine Prechtel. Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, who's this great Sufi teacher.
Houston Smith, the
venerable Houston Smith.
Those are our goats.
Those are our goats from the farm.
Aren't they adorable?
That the one looking into your eyes is Pynchon, named after Thomas Pynchon.
There's Gobekli.
So that's us at Gobekli, and there's
Changman.
There's Genghis Khan. So if anyone
Thank you, Robert,
has something to open up, and I thank you, Robert, for helping and for really, and in this Thanksgiving tradition, we got back from Gobekli Tepe, and one of the first early things we did, was you interviewed me when I brought out my book in 2016, and that sort of got started. This whole thing
3 years ago.
So so I really, I always appreciate that.
Yeah, this whole thing with the two of you has evolved in a really interesting way, and never is a dull moment when I have you here on Fridays. And I know people love hanging out with you and chatting with you and hearing your stories and throwing some of these ideas around. So it's almost like having like a fireside chat or a kind of a very long ongoing kind of cup of tea or coffee, right?
That's right.
And I think that's why people dig it. Let's see what people are saying.
Yeah.
In the chat room.
Hello, everybody.
Let's see what they've got going in there. Could you ask Steve and Krys if they're familiar with the perennialist author Charles Upton?
Charles Upton, yeah. That's another kind of an odd story. Yeah, when we first started Logosophia, right? So I'm looking up the word and everything, and I can't find Logosophia anywhere. It doesn't exist anywhere. I later found out that not Wordsworth. was it Wordsworth? Anyway, someone else had come up with it in 1800s. But anyway, and so we're doing our first book, and I didn't bother to get the domain name, logosophia.com.
Right.
And of course, so then when I do it, somebody grabbed it, and the guy who grabbed it turns out to be this guy, the guy who owns Sophia Prentice, who publishes the works of Charles Upton.
Oh, interesting.
And and for years we have a friend who knows the guy who publishes, Jim Wetmore. And she said, "Oh no, he's a really nice guy. You got to meet him." I'm pissed. I don't want to talk to this guy. He stole, he wouldn't contact me. He stole my domain name. That's why it's Logosophia Books. And so finally, like one day he was in town. We went to dinner with him and his then wife, and we hit it off. We had such a great time. We were like best friends. Of course.
Cool.
Anyway, so I haven't read a lot of Upton. I've read him in anthologies more, but I've read a few of Sophia Prentice's author, to make a long
they
story
put out
long.
beautiful books.
So they have some nice,
really high quality books.
I have a little bit of a philosophical problem with the perennialists, which is that the only thing that's valid to them is a traditional religion, and they'll tell you what the traditional religions are, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and there's kind of like there's no room for other venues to the divine,
Right.
So I have a little problem with that. That's kind of a general thing, but most of the writing, very good, very intellectual, very smart people.
Is that what Nas is?
And Nas,
Professor Sayed Hossein Nasr is one. He's a perennialist.
Whose book, he's like the main one, whose book Krys recommended.
His book, the first book of Nasr's that we read was Knowledge in the Sacred, which is a really tough read. Every single sentence is like a packed thought form that you have to just unpack every word, but it's brilliant.
Yeah.
If you have the fortitude to read it, it's brilliant.
It's kind of like, it's like bunches of dependent clauses, but they work together
the
beautifully.
Longest sentences I've ever seen.
Yeah. So, thanks. Who asked the question?
Yeah, who was asking that?
Oh, Oswald Spengler.
Okay. I know that I've seen
who also goes by a few other names.
Okay.
Thank
you, Oswald.
So I think
Anybody
that's
else?
about it. Everybody's just saying how much they like your the shows that we do, and your journey and all that stuff. So a lot of love and appreciation. Maury says that Genghis looks like Gandalf. That's his cat.
Oh, really? Hi,
Maury's got a tuxedo.
Yeah.
So, tuxedos are great. They're just
wonderful.
I don't know.
Yeah,
They're just very people.
Chang slept through the whole show.
Yeah.
He's in his warm bed. Yeah.
Jasper's taking the day off.
Apparently.
Yeah. So
well, thank you, Robert.
So and I guess we can, feels like we're winding up. I think we can wish everyone, a great Christmas and New Year's, and let's really hope that we can, because I think part of the reset is going to be on us, for 2020, and since we won't
work on your beauty quotient. Make your home beautiful.
I agree with that. That's good advice.
Make your home
from
beautiful.
Both of you.
Start at 0.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
No, go to the thrift shop, find something good.
Yeah.
All right. So if you want to find out more about Stephen Krys's work, Logosophia Books.com. You can go there. And then we'll make sure that the Indie GoGo link is part of the show description. So there's a lot of different ways you could contribute, from a very modest way to all the way up to, really being a big angel with wings. So, and what you're asking for is not extravagant. It's doable.
And if you can't, maybe you can send it around to people who are interested in great books. I mean, it's what we do.
So there you go. All right. So I guess we'll see you guys. After the year, right? New year.
That's it. Have a great
after the eclipse,
New Year.
and I'm sure we'll have
All right, eclipse.
plenty to talk about. It's just this impeachment thing just heats up to just absolutely ridiculous levels.
It's like fever pitch.
Yeah,
isn't it?
we've been following it,
Mhm.
and and I have to admit there were a number of blood boiling moments.
Yeah.
So there's this guy in Texas. His name is Al Green.
Yeah.
And he's blind, and he said that no matter what happens with this impeachment, we can impeach him more than once.
Huh.
That's what he said. Like, so if this isn't successful, we're not going to stop.
Oh God.
Like, that's their stated goal now is to completely remove. We've known this, but they're not going to let up until and let's just play this out. Let's say there is another election and he does get elected again. There's no guarantee it's going to stop. There could be another.
Well, that tells you something. That tells you that there's some really powerful forces against him for some reason.
It really, the one thing that really spoke to me about why there's such a intense hatred and goal to remove Trump is that even though Trump says he's a globalist and a nationalist, which I kind of believe, I think he's more rooted in the nationalist piece.
So
right? He wants to be a nationalist that reaches out globally. He doesn't want to be a globalist with all these other global entities who share a fraction of their national sort of identity with each other. He wants to do it the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And the globalists are the ones that are not happy with Trump, and they want him, theoretically, they want him out, right? The theoretical, and there are globalists. There are people that are, involved in international trade and commerce and the dissolution between, boundaries and borders in support of that kind of model, right? Which is fascism, really. And that's what they want. And I think he's okay with that, but he wants to hang on to this idea that countries have borders and they have tariffs and they have these things that are honored. And that's where he's pissed people off. And the Democrats, like, have you seen the video of Biden going after this guy?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's scary.
Yeah. You want to wrestle?
And technically he's still the front runner, right? Or if
technically,
right?
he's scared. That's a scary video.
Yeah.
Because Biden wants to fight this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's always talking about how many push-ups he can do.
It gives you insight into his character.
Yeah, he's like, he's like an old boxer who's like lost it, You
see the weird picture where he's sucking on his wife's finger?
I
did
purposely
see it.
Avoided that one.
I did see it, and I got the feeling like, well, she was flailing her hands as she was talking, and he was kind of there. And I got the feeling he was just kind of being playful.
Yeah.
Am I being too generous?
Well, it's probably the first time he's actually touched anybody over the age of 14 in years.
Yeah, I'll grant you that.
But it still boggles my mind that here he is on video stating that he did exactly what they accused Trump of doing and they want to impeach him for. And he's on video stating it, and it's still like no one, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I guess I am still, that no one can even pay lip service to it.
That's because the mainstream media will not report on it. They won't give it.
Talking about.
Right, because they want Trump out. And Trump has taken a dump on the mainstream media, so he's made no friends in that world.
But why?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Why? I mean, clearly they're going to do what they're going to do anyway.
Yeah. And he's. Yeah. I mean, it's. And we do know he's his own worst enemy, and he's peopled his cabinet with.
Absolute.
With globalists and neocons, etc. But get to your other point. But no one ever talks about, like, for example, the port that China owned in.
Long Beach.
California. Long Beach, that's it. is no longer Chinese.
Well,
Well, they didn't own it, but they were put in charge of running and maintaining that port.
Yeah, they have them all over
They're
the place.
managing that port.
And what do you
and
think?
how much human trafficking
Yeah,
is
what do you
going through
think is
that?
going in and out of that port? You know,
Yeah.
I order up myself a Falun Gong kidney. You know.
Yeah. My big thing with him is that, as far as I can tell, his administration has arrested more pedophiles than any other administration.
Seems that way.
If he does nothing else in his life but protect the children, he gets
Even
a
if
gold star in his lapel
Yeah.
from Crimis. What is more important than the
Yeah.
children?
Epstein doesn't get arrested if
He
Hillary's
doesn't get
president.
any credit for that whatsoever. When I tell people that, they get this blank stare, like.
Yeah, but the environment. That's all they ever say. Yeah, but the environment.
So anyway,
Like
you know,
he's out there with a hatchet on the trees or something.
Did you see Pelosi yesterday?
oh my
Mhm.
God.
There was so much love.
Oh my God.
It
I
was,
can't even.
It was.
How can people not look at her or Joe Biden on
Jerry
that side of the
Nadler,
ledger
Nadler.
sheet?
Right. Well, in the few times that we can actually have conversations with people, so, well, what do you think of Pelosi? Oh, she's horrible. I mean, everyone thinks she's horrible. So, I mean, that Rosie.
Rosie. Oh, Rosie. Hello.
Rosie had to
Rosie.
take advantage of Jasper's absence
Hi, Rosie.
Oh.
Oh, sweetie.
and also bug me so I can feed her.
Yeah, it must be time, right?
Her time is whenever her time is.
That's as it
Right?
should.
She keeps moving the time up. Usually the time is around 4
Well,
o'clock.
as the days get darker earlier, that's their cue, I think. It's like,
Could
oh,
be.
isn't it? Well, it's time. It's dark.
Yeah.
Because it used to be 3:30, getting kind of close to her time,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
But
So
I
we'll see where this whole thing goes. I mean, it feels like it's edging towards some kind of very potentially destructive climax. That's what it feels like.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
No. And so the eclipse is the Christmas Eve,
Christmas Day
Christmas Day.
starts on the 25th and it goes into the 26th. But, we theoretically should be coming more into alignment with that energy not that long from now. Probably about a week from today, people will start to feel that eclipse energy.
And what does that feel like?
It depends. I think a lot of it depends on the sign. So we're dealing with Capricorn, and it's all going to be a lot about government, the egregious excess of government, overreach of government, failure of government. This is all very Capricornian. Some kind of corporate overtones. We'll see some of that as well, or we'll feel some of that. So one of the things that's really interesting and is going to be talked about over the course of the next couple of weeks is the fact that Chick-fil-A started to donate to a foundation called Covenant House. And Covenant House is very much tied into Cyndi Lauper's True Colors Foundation, which is support of transgender and lesbian, gay youth. So Covenant House, and Covenant House has also sponsored some drag queen story time hours. It's come out now. So this is, again, like this idea of corporations kind of doing good or supposedly doing good, or it feels really like what Chick-fil-A is involved in some form of blood money. Like they're sending this out so that they can, point to these so-called detractors who are on the, sort of the progressive left. So, well, we send money to Covenant House. Look what Covenant House does. But that's going to backfire on these very staunch supporters of Chick-fil-A, who have been supporting them because of their so-called moral stance on things.
Right. Did they?
This is just some of the stuff that I think is going to come up. Mm-hmm. And people are going to have to look at, like the South Node in Capricorn and how it's really fallible in a lot of ways. And, sort of I would just call this like a blood libel. Like they're paying the money. so that they can at some point point to the fact that they support Covenant House. And all
So
the
like
Covenant
their
House
own
does.
brand of
Right.
virtue signaling?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to see more of this. That's what it feels like. And it's going to be a very interesting thing for the, the so-called Christian right to deal with.
That's what I
Like, are
thought,
they
that were
going to
connected
continue
with
to
it.
support
Right.
and buy chicken sandwiches? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, for me, it's not about buying whose chicken sandwich are you going to support, but why even support the whole thing in the first place? It's a really bad product on some level.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
That's not what's being talked about.
No.
Who knows? Maybe they use real chickens. I don't know. But that's not what we're talking. We're talking about who,
Chicken.
their moral stance versus their
Yes.
their food stance.
That's the water we swim in these days.
What's that?
That's the water we swim in these days.
Oh, it's terrible.
never-
I mean, it's
no,
just really
never-
bad. It's so bad.
It
Like
is.
I
There's
was
no
talking.
other way to say it.
Yeah, I was talking about this guy, Tim Ryan, who is an announcer for the 49ers. And he was making an observation that Lamar Jackson runs a play that is, hard to find the ball. And,
right.
and his skin is dark and his uniform is dark and the ball is dark. And did he make an awkward kind of observation? Sure he did.
So what?
But there are people who are part of the team, Richard Sherman, who's about as woke as it gets, says it's no big deal. It's not a big deal. And from a sporting perspective, if the guy was 6'8", would you remark how tall he was?
Yeah.
And how that plays a
Physical
role in him?
attribute.
Right, exactly. And now he's got to serve a 1-game suspension. It's just so fucking ridiculous. So stupid.
The announcer?
And what's that? The announcer has to serve a
The
1-game
announcer.
suspension.
Who's suspending him? I mean,
The 49ers are.
Oh, because he's their team announcer.
That's right.
Oh.
Like, what's he going to do for 1 game? Find God and
It's just a power play.
Yeah. No, that's
It's a power
still,
play.
and I talk about who's the Al Green too, right? I saw a clip of him jumping up and coming in front of the microphone and complaining. I mean, the horror. I mean, he was like, it was like preaching, the horror of the fact that the other day when they had the 4 supposed, experts on law, that none of them were black.
Oh, right.
The same Al. I assume it's the same Al
Right.
Green.
how does he know? He can't see.
I didn't know. I didn't know he was blind either. But
He's blind. I'm sorry. Bad joke.
Is he?
But
He's blind?
yeah, he's blind.
Oh,
He's blind.
so anyway. So
Right. And then the whole backlash with the Kamala Harris thing.
What's the backlash?
The people are blaming, the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are starting to devour themselves. They're blaming them for Kamala Harris's departure.
Yeah.
Like there are too many white candidates.
Yeah. And
Oh, really? Is that what they said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like, no one's going to the Charlie's Angel movies because men don't like powerful women.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the movie sucks, the idea sucks, the franchise
Right.
itself out, on TV 30 years ago.
Right. It has nothing to do with the fact that nobody liked Kamala Harris.
Right.
Doesn't matter what her skin color is.
Yeah.
She was really nasty and
Okay, we always have to go back to, can you say Tavistock? Can you say Frankfurt School? Can you say mind control? Can you
total
say
mind
control the
control.
narrative?
total mind control, social Marxism, right?
It's just like with bringing beauty up all the time. We have to keep going back to Tavistock, Frankfurt. We really need to remember we're being played constantly.
Yeah, totally.
Ugliness is not organic.
What'd you say?
Ugliness is not organic.
Ugliness is not organic.
People just don't get together. So that looks really nice, or really, it's like what art becomes, right? The Mona Lisa, that's really nice. I think I'll slash it,
Right.
Or put excrement on a Madonna, it's, but that's what
that seems like the mission statement right now.
Yeah,
It's
the end of art.
That's their whole game plan. destroy beauty, drag everything down, destroy the culture. It's in their playbook.
Yeah.
They wrote it down. They have bullet points.
So
Turn the
That's
Not
place
right.
hard
into
to find it.
well, just
That's
turn the
right.
place into hell. Just make it look like and feel like hell all the time.
Yeah, so that's why it's on us to build it up. They tear it down, we build it up. They
Mhm.
tear it down, we build it up.
Makes sense.
So
All
Robert,
right.
So what is it? Keep your heart open to what's possible.
Oh yeah. So yeah. Use your head to discern what's real,
I've only heard it 5,000 times. I couldn't come up with it.
and your heart to stay open to what's possible. That's it. You know?
Very good. Thank you, Robert.
There was this guy Ralph Barbieri who used to be on the radio in the Bay Area, and Ralph was this really interesting guy. He was Italian guy, dyed-in-the-wool liberal, but also very aggressive. Like he was this real interesting kind of contrast. And he was one of these early sports radio guys. And one time I ran into him at the Whole Life Expo. I saw him walking around. I said, "Hey, Ralph." He didn't know me from Adam. I said, "Hey, Ralph." I was doing tarot readings. So he was the only guy he sat down at a tarot reading with me. Anyway, his sign off was, "Angels fly because they take themselves lightly."
Oh, that's a good
That's
one.
not bad.
Yeah,
I
I
like
can't
that.
steal that one though. That's Ralph's.
That works.
That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you'd enjoy that. All right. Hey, have a great day.
Yeah,
have a
this
great
was fun.
weekend.
This was
All
Have a
fun.
great holiday.
Yeah,
You
you
too.
too.
You too.
And the Crimis, by
everyone.
the way, you can actually experience the Crimis. They have an Airbnb. And you can go
Right.
hang out.
Experience.
Yep.
You'd live and in person. You should raise your
We have
rates
the
now, by the
Christmas
way.
tree up now
You should charge more for your Airbnb because you're like celebrities now.
because we're hot stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
But
You
the
know,
trees
you probably
up.
get at least another $5 or $10
We have
a night
openings
out of this
actually.
deal.
It's a low
Yeah.
booking month. We just don't have that
Yeah.
many people this
Yeah,
month.
winter-
So
So go hang out with the Crimis and go experience some beauty.
that'd be nice. Yeah.
All right, guys.
All
I'll see you
right.
next month.
Yeah,
Okay.
this was fun.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.